I believe that Arlene and Steve are... I have a problem. I can't discuss it right now, especially on camera.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 20 creepiest documentaries.
I also must admit that I feel very affectionate towards Nancy, as I'm sure I've displayed many times, even in your presence.
For this list, we're looking at film documentaries that tackle dark topics in an unsettling way. Because we're only looking at movies, multi-part TV shows will not be included. Have you seen any of these documentaries? What do you make of the real stories? Let us know in the comments below. Number 20, Mommy, Dead and Dearest. Released by HBO, Mommy, Dead and Dearest chronicles the events that led to Dee Dee Blanchard's death.
The truth is, okay, I'll admit it. I did actually stab her. I will admit it.
It details how she committed factitious disorder imposed on another, or what was once known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, on her daughter, Gypsy Rose. Blanchard essentially made it seem like her daughter suffered from a number of terrible ailments. While upholding the lie, the mother put her child through unnecessary surgeries and other terrible things. Gypsy Rose then conspired with her boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn, to kill Blanchard. It's unsettling to think of the horrors that pushed a daughter to slay her own mother. No matter how you view it, Mommy, Dead and Dearest makes for one creepy viewing experience.
I take blame on myself and I blame other people, but I never once blame y'all.
Number 19, Tabloid. Back in September of 1977, Mormon missionary Kirk Anderson was supposedly abducted and abused by a woman named Joyce McKinney. The story became known as the Manacled Mormon case.
She said to him she was going to go on having sex with him until she found she missed a period and would then hopefully be pregnant by him.
This terrifying story was extensively covered in the British tabloids, specifically the warring rivals Daily Express and Daily Mirror. The documentary Tabloid conveys these events with unnerving detail and is even narrated by Joyce McKinney herself. That shocking choice immediately brings viewers closer to the case than they expected. As a result, those watching will further question the story that she weaves because it has multiple viewpoints and perspectives.
I made everything that he wanted. I was like his little, wifey almost.
Number 18, There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane. This troubling documentary tells the story of the 2009 Taconic State Parkway crash, a nasty traffic collision that resulted in 8 deaths.
It was a horrific scene on the Taconic Parkway near Route 117 this afternoon. This burned-out shell was all that remained of a minivan after the head-on crash, which left 8 people dead.
It was caused by a woman named Diane Schuler, the titular Aunt Diane. On that fateful day, she was the one traveling on the parkway in the wrong direction. It's a very disconcerting story that is rooted in unimaginable tragedy. Throughout the documentary, upsetting questions are raised about Schuler's state of mind. Between footage of the accident, interviews with grieving individuals, and some rather uncomfortable topics, There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane puts forth a very uneasy atmosphere.
I feel like someone's gonna say, 10 years later, it proves what happened. There's so much more to the story.
Number 17, Team FOXCATCHER. The story of John DuPont was famously captured in the 2014 film FOXCATCHER, which earned 5 Oscar nominations.
You have a problem with me? John, don't, John. John, I don't have a problem. Hey, John.
Team FOXCATCHER was released 2 years later and serves as an eerie companion piece, retelling the story with a more grounded and arguably more disturbing angle. This Netflix documentary uses harrowing archival footage to tell its story. Viewers are also given a rather personal and alarming glimpse into the mind of a killer. By incorporating all these details, viewers get a sense of what led to DuPont's horrifying actions. The documentary explores how mental illness, wealth, and power can create a nightmarish situation.
Dave Schultz was the truest friend John had.
Kill them all!
Number 16, Room 237. The Shining is one of the most elusive films of all time, inviting endless interpretations and readings since its release in 1980. Room 237 honors the movie's legacy and examines some of the most profound and intriguing readings.
But it looks like he's a giant mopping clearing the forest.
Topics like American imperialism, Greek mythology, and the Holocaust are explored in depth. The famous conspiracy that Stanley Kubrick helped fake the moon landing is also covered. Room 237 ultimately stands as a spooky, complex, and endlessly riveting glimpse into the granddaddy of all horror films. Its off-putting interpretations prove to be nearly as frightening as the movie itself.
This is an impossible window. It is impossible. It is physically impossible. It cannot be there. It should not be there. There's no place in the hotel for this window to exist.
Number 15. This is the Zodiac speaking. Much has been written about the Zodiac killings.
Get on your stomach so I can tie your feet.
Okay. It gets really cold out here at night. We could freeze.
At this point, the case is among the most discussed serial tragedies in American history. This is the Zodiac Speaking is one of the most definitive documentaries about the case. It contains interviews with retired police officers and criminal profilers. Their first-hand accounts of the case give viewers unfettered access into the distressing story that has captivated Americans and true crime enthusiasts for decades. The disturbing story covers how Zodiac targeted innocent people and flippantly discussed his crimes. All the interviews in the documentary play on his notoriety. Seeing the impact the case has had on people's psyches is arguably even scarier than the story itself.
Well, I would say the paranoia initial lasted a good 6 to 7 months. People were very concerned, and it escalated every time after another reported killing.
Number 14, The Killing of America. Released in 1982, The Killing of America argues that the United States is in the midst of a messy cultural collapse. The title has both metaphorical and literal layers to it. Much of the film is centered around the incredible wave of violence that struck America in the 60s and 70s.
A few weeks after the assassination of President Kennedy, the murder rate exploded upward, tripled in just 10 years, and continues to the present day.
This includes the assassination of John and Robert Kennedy, the rise of serial killers, and a very distressing shooting. It's a shocking documentary that leaves viewers feeling extremely uncomfortable, featuring genuine footage of violence and interviews with the likes of criminals like Sirhan and Ed Kemper. The Killing of America makes for one distressing watch.
A new breed of killer appeared. They didn't want money or sex or revenge. It was a new kind of murder. The senseless killing of random strangers.
Number 13, The Cannibal That Walked Free. Having aired on the British station Channel 5, The Cannibal That Walked Free is a nightmarish glimpse into one of humanity's darkest crimes. Through the lens of Japanese criminal Issei Sagawa, it explores the psychology behind cannibalism.
26 years ago, this man murdered and ate a woman in Paris. He has never stood trial. Today, he walks the Tokyo streets a free man.
In June of 1981, Sagawa killed and desecrated a student named René Hartefelt. But he was allowed to walk free thanks to a legal snafu between France and Japan. This documentary delves into Sagawa's crimes and the psychology behind his actions through interviews with Sagawa himself. Seeing this perturbing story get conveyed through the lens of the perpetrator can be skin-crawling. For many, it may prove too much to bear.
You see the beautiful girls on the train in the summer, and you see their legs, don't you? I think they look delicious. That much is true.
Number 12, Wisconsin Death Trip. Based on a nonfiction book of the same name, Wisconsin Death Trip is a sinister docudrama about a turbulent time in Wisconsin history. The story follows a series of disturbing occurrences that plagued the state in the late 19th century.
The grave of Mrs. Sarah Smith was unearthed for the purpose of removing the remains, and upon opening the coffin, it was discovered that she'd been buried while in a trance.
This includes the abandoning of children, homicides, arson, and supernatural delusion. As if the subject matter wasn't troubling enough, the docudrama is also shot in silent black and white to convey the style of old movies. The aged cinematography immediately puts viewers on edge. Meanwhile, the contemporary newspaper accounts are chillingly narrated by Ian Holm. The combined effect is one of deep and uncomfortable surrealism.
We can say, honestly, that we know of few states or cities which offer the advantages of those enjoyed by Wisconsin and Black River Falls.
Number 11, Eileen Wuornos, The Selling of a Serial Killer. Eileen Wuornos was a sex worker who killed 7 clients between 1989 and 1990. 2 years later, Nick Broomfield made a documentary. Most of the film is centered around Broomfield's attempts at conducting an interview with Wuornos in prison.
I was doing fine until Tyra told me start going to see strangers and make more money. That's how I wound up in this situation.
As she discusses the case, viewers witness the troubling defense that she put forth and the implications that it represented. The interviews with Wuornos are also bone-chilling. It's clear that her life was full of extensive pain and suffering at every stage. Years later, the documentary became an enormous inspiration for Charlize Theron, who would later win an Oscar for playing Warnos in Monster.
Yeah, I don't need a ride. Because I'm going to take your car.
Number 10, The Imposter.
It gives you nightmares. It really does.
In 1994, 13-year-old Nicholas Barkley disappeared in Texas. 3 years later, a man claiming to be Nicholas came forward. But this man wasn't Nicholas at all. He was Frédéric Bourdin, a French con artist. The Imposter explains how Bourdin was able to get away with it for so long, despite being significantly older than Nicholas and not looking anything like him. It's incredibly disturbing how Bourdin inserted himself into the Barkley family and tricked them into accepting him. Most remarkable of all, however, is that director Bart Layton conducted interviews with Bourdin himself, which makes the case even more complex as he somehow manages to come across as sympathetic.
From as long as I remember, I wanted to be someone else.
Number 9, Cropsey.
Growing up on Staten Island, Barbara and I had often heard the legend of Cropsey. For the kids in our neighborhood, Cropsey was the escaped mental patient who lived in the tunnels beneath the old abandoned Willowbrook Mental Institution.
A pair of filmmakers who grew up on Staten Island decided to take a closer look at the New York version of the boogeyman, Cropsey, and how or if this urban legend fits into the mysteries involving a series of kidnapped children in the 70s and 80s.
When your child disappears and you don't know where that child is, to a parent, the child is never dead.
From the letters prime suspect Andre Rand sends the documentarians claiming his innocence, to investigating the tunnels underneath the condemned Willowbrook State School for people with neurodevelopmental disabilities, and finally theories about devil worshippers, Cropsey is sure to send a chill down your spine.
Is there satanic cults, people that practice? Of course there is. But it's something that's kept very quiet, something that not many departments investigate.
Number 8, The Bridge.
So then I cut over just to see or maybe possibly help.
The Golden Gate Bridge may be one of America's most iconic landmarks and the image that comes to mind when you think of the city of San Francisco. But for many, its looming presence is a symbol of tragedy. This documentary takes a closer look at some of these tragic incidents in 2004, but it certainly isn't easy viewing. It remains controversial, with reports of bridge jumpers increasing after the documentary was released. And in 2015, it was even removed from Netflix in New Zealand.
Gene had people in this world that loved him. And he hurt them. If I see him again, that's what I want to tell him. He hurt me. And I didn't think he would ever do that.
Number 7, Holy Hell.
I thought I was capturing life and expressing love.
While searching for a new home and a new purpose in the 1980s, film grad Will Allen fell in with the Buddha-Field New Religious Movement, a cult based in West Hollywood at the time.
It was all designed to show how devoted you really were.
He wanted to control the social lives, the interactions of everybody, what they did.
Allen became the group's documentarian and lived with them for 22 years, finally leaving in 2007. He became inspired to make a movie and used all the footage he had of his time with the Buddha-Field cult and its leader, Michelle, to create Holy Hell. This direct look at the inner workings of a cult is both rare and creepy, made all the more unsettling by the fact that the cult continues to this day, now based in Hawaii.
Even to this day, I don't understand. But some people still stayed.
Number 6, The Family I Had. Originally intended to examine juvenile criminals in the U.S., this documentary quickly shifted to focus on the personal tragedy faced by Charity Lee in February 2007, involving her young daughter.
She was in a body bag.
It follows Charity as she grapples with the reality of her son having killed her daughter, as she mourns Ella's loss but refuses to abandon Paris, still visiting him in prison. It's difficult to know what to make of this uncomfortable watch, as the film leans into the fact that with true crime, there are no easy answers.
I try to keep everything as benign as possible. I don't want to do anything that's going to make Paris want to hurt him.
Number 5, TITICUT Follies. One of of the most disturbing films ever made, TITICUT Follies was banned for over 20 years upon release. Shot in black and white with no narration, it's a raw exposé of the injustices that Americans with mental health issues faced in the 1960s. Specifically centered on the Bridgewater State Hospital in Massachusetts, the film shows the gross mistreatment of the inmates, all people in need of real care who were dehumanized and abused by those tasked with looking after them.
If I see enough improvement in you.
But how can I improve if I'm getting worse? I'm trying to tell you, day by day I am getting worse. Because of the circumstances, because of the situation.
Despite being banned, the film was able to draw attention to these issues, though it still took decades for this to begin.
Whatever sins you have committed, by the use of your sense of touch, amen.
Number 4, Jesus Camp.
Listen, we hold the keys. We can change the world.
This look at a summer camp for one branch of evangelical Christians has been disturbing viewers around the world since its initial release. Seen by many as a damning portrayal of allegedly abusive practices at camps like the featured Kids on Fire School of Ministry, it played a role in getting the camp shut down.
Father, we just wash them with the water of your word. We say no more, devil, no more.
The camp pastor, Becky Fisher, was forced to close the retreat due to backlash. But it's arguably a credit to the directors that you can't necessarily tell where their own sympathies lie while watching this movie. It's down to the viewer to decide what's right and what's wrong.
You could call it brainwashing, but I am radical and passionate in teaching children about their responsibility.
Number 3, Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father.
He called back to the Sunnyvale police station, so he gave me another number, and then I got through to Sergeant Krulak, and he said, "Your son is dead under suspicious circumstances. Have you got any idea why he was in the park?"
A harrowing watch, Dear Zachary follows Kurt Kenny as he makes a movie about Andrew Bagby, his lifelong friend who was allegedly murdered by his ex, Shirley Jane Turner. Turner revealed shortly after Andrew's death that she was pregnant with their child, but police had a difficult time pinning the murder on her.
I have to tell you that Andrew is dead.
Are you sure?
Yes, ma'am, I am. I'm absolutely sure.
The movie is intended as an archive of Andrew, a widely loved person by all accounts for his son Zachary. But the project became more complex the longer it went on, and by the time it was finished, it had become a fully fledged documentary. An examination of loss and grief, Dear Zachary is as poignant as it is upsetting.
This film was no longer a letter to you. It was now a letter to someone else.
Number 2, The Act of Killing.
Yang matian tidak wajar. Datang sini sehat. Sampai di sini dipukul mati.
With subject matter this heavy, The Act of Killing was always going to be a tough watch. In Indonesia, filmmaker Joshua Oppenheimer interviews former executioners who took part in the Indonesian mass killings of 1965 to 66. They reenact the killings in a variety of genres, including westerns and musicals, while Oppenheimer asks them both about their artistic choices in the portrayals and about the events themselves. The fun reenactments juxtaposed with the horrific topics they portray is extremely disturbing. It's not hard to see why this documentary remains so controversial.
Apakah ini kembali deh kepada saya?
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1, Abducted in Plain Sight.
She looked up at me, her eyes beaming, and I knew that I had found the little girl that I was searching for.
Jan Broberg's story is particularly disturbing. When she was just an adolescent in the 1970s, one of the Broberg family's neighbors, Robert Berchtold, befriended Jan's parents and inserted himself into their lives. Twice Berchtold abducted Jan, including taking her to Mexico. His manipulation knew no bounds. Even after Jan was brought home the first time, her parents still allowed Berchtold to be around her, even letting him sleep in her bed.
I don't think I can ever really forgive myself for letting that happen.
By far the strangest detail is the recordings Berchtold made of aliens to further increase his influence on Jan. Thankfully, Jan and her family survived the long ordeal.
And I immediately thought I'd been kidnapped by a UFO.